So hi, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video as part of the inaugural Northern Real Farming Conference. I'm Rachel Marshall, I'm part of FoodFutures, which is North Lancashire's sustainable food network, and we bring together food producers, businesses, communities and local policymakers to work together to build a more resilient and fair food system in our local area. I'm also a researcher at Lancaster University, and as part of this work I've been doing a project around procurement and how we can use procurement of food buying from local institutions to support local food producers and build a better food system in our region. And as part of this work I came across lots of different stories around how procurement can be used, and one particular story kind of has national significance, and that's an approach that's been developed by the National Board for Dynamic Food Procurement. And as part of this session on procurement, we wanted to provide an opportunity to learn more about this approach and how it might support small-scale producers on finding alternative routes to market. So we're very grateful to be joined by 3 members of the board this morning on Zoom, and they each bring a unique perspective and experience. So thank you very much, Chrissy Story, Greg Parsons and Rich Osborne. So it's probably best if I let you introduce yourselves and maybe tell us a little bit about your background and the perspective that you bring to this. Chrissy, do you want to go first on that one?
Yes, more than happy to do that. Yes, I'm Chrissy Story. I'm based down in Bristol in the southwest. My background of this, I work around public sector procurement, particularly sustainable procurement, amongst other things as well, but that's kind of the main one for this. And back in 2015, I was working with Bath and North East Somerset Council, looking to let a new food contract in a very kind of innovative way. And we came up with this model called Dynamic Food Procurement. So I've been working on that and a way around that and different things and working with procurement kind of ever since. That's kind of my local food procurement background. So I'm coming from a public sector procurement background rather than a supplier or anything else. This is kind of my procurement bit is my bit. Okay.
Rich, do you want to go next?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Rich Osborne. My company name is Equilibrium Markets, but we're better known as our food brand, which is called Fresh Range. And we were the company that provided the technology and the management for Bath and North East Somerset Council, where Chrissy was based as a procurement officer. We enabled them to try this new approach to procuring food for schools. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that later, but basically we enable lots of different food producers to take part in a procurement framework for supplying food to the public sector.
Excellent. And Greg?
Okay. And me? Good morning. Yeah, Greg Parsons. I joined the board a little while ago now. I came to it through some work I'd done in Somerset to set up Somerset Larder, which is a collaboration of food producers that brought together to supply food and drink to Hinkley Point, one of the biggest construction projects on Earth, actually. But yeah, pretty big for the area. And I also work in food production and have worked with other groups of producers. And so, but come at it very much from a sort of a producer perspective, connected right back to farms as well. So with the agricultural side top of mind as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thanks for those introductions, different perspectives. So yeah, the first kind of question I wanted to explore is when we talk about dynamic food procurement, what are we talking about? And I'll let whoever wants to go first on that one stick your hand up, maybe.
I'm happy to go first. So I guess the main difference between dynamic food procurement and what has always been conventional food procurement is that it allows the public sector to procure directly from multiple primary producers. So whereas in the past, the sort of stereotypical procurement framework results in one big supplier or maybe 2 or 3 really big food suppliers supplying everything, what dynamic food procurement enables is multiple small to medium-sized enterprises being able to actually participate in procurement. That's done by using what's called a dynamic purchasing system, which is nothing new in procurement terms. You know, it's used to procure stationery in the public sector already. So procurers are quite used to a DPS, a dynamic purchasing system, but it's not really been used in this way in food, in a way that busts the barriers that currently exist for farmers that are that have previously not been able to supply the public sector. And so, yeah, basically the way it works is dynamic food procurement is first a dynamic purchasing system where lots of producers and suppliers can supply, not just one for each category of food. And then there is a whole approach to fulfilling food from producers in a dynamic way, so that whenever the farmer can supply their food is when they're given the chance to do so. And when they're not able to supply their food, that's fine. And they're not expected to supply all food within a given category. So whereas in the past, a supplier would be expected to supply all the fruit and veg, now with dynamic food procurement, a farmer can just supply carrots if that's what they grow. And so that's what I would say in summary is the real difference between the two systems.
Yeah, from procurement point of view, I'd like to add to that. It's really a kind of referring to dynamic food procurement as a model, as opposed to a kind of a process rather than actually a kind of way of doing procurement, because it has this dynamic purchasing system, as Rich said, kind of underpinning everything, and the middle bit has a tech logistics agent who is the focal point for all the activity, and the contracting authority will own both contracts. So it kind of keeps the contracting authority, so like a local authority or whatever, really is sort of influencing what they want to buy to meet the various agendas and strategies they have, particularly around healthy eating and sustainability, and increasingly on kind of carbon emissions. So instead of the kind of letting a contract out to someone who says they can do that, where quite often cost is the driver, this way means a contracting authority can actually meet other targets, so basically buying for the public good by using local suppliers, so the economic development side of it and the carbon side of it, and it kind of works that way around. And it's a very innovative model, but it hasn't really been thought about before in this way. And we kind of, within Bath and North East Somerset, we kind of co-created it actually with Rich. I mean, he was very him and his cohort were very influential and kind of instrumental in actually getting the model going and actually working with Baines to see how it went. Just a bit of background on it. So when I was working with Bath and North East Somerset, we were looking to really get a food contract, and we had lots of supplier engagement, a huge amount of supplier engagement to try and get to where we needed to get to. And this one kind of said, well, this is the way we need to do it. It was meeting a local food strategy, which has been launched. It had been meeting a local procurement strategy, which is kind of what's called buy local, so kind of buy as much going from the area. And we had this food contract coming up, and it came up in this kind of perfect timing, which doesn't always happen in public sector procurement. And with innovative people and people who are prepared to just look at something from a different angle and how that works together. And this came up with this, that I think is actually a really cool model, because it does allow for not just food being bought, but everything else that can come into it as well.
I think from a producer perspective, it opens up these markets which previously would be deemed to be very daunting, with a hell of a lot of administrative work to be done to access public sector procurement. There will be some SMEs supplying into the public sector currently, but that will be very much managed by the big food service producers Rich alluded to. But with the dynamic food procurement model, it means that, you know, it's the aggregated supply. No one supplier has to supply the full quantity. It brings together the quantities from different small and medium-sized producers, so it enables them to access the markets that they wouldn't be able to do on their own. So I think that's the main benefit. I think the flexibility side is key, especially in today's world where, you know, who knows what requirement is going to be you know, needed by the different public sector buyers in these uncertain times. So actually what the model does deliver is total flexibility for both buyer and seller to tap in and tap out as required. I think one of the big things is, for me, is I watch very closely is the plan for public procurement was endorsed and backed and launched by the government, but it didn't really come with a sort of guidebook as to how it would be delivered. And part of the appeal of being part of this group and working with the food hubs that I do is that actually through the technology coming together, and also important part of what we do is to lobby with government and DEFRA to make sure that they're aware of the pace it's working at. I think there is a real way, there's a real opportunity for this to be delivered and open up that opportunity as government wants to for more SMEs to supply into the public sector.
And just one last comment, actually, I think it's been said, but just to really be explicit, it means that suppliers can join the contract at any time. So traditional procurement, once the contract's let, everyone else is locked out for that 3, 4, 5 years, depending how it's set up. But this means that actually they can come in if they if they miss the original date of the procurement advert, they can apply to join, and the procurement authority has to go back to them and sort of get them the opportunity. So it might be for 1 year they have an excess of something, and they can just do it for that period of time and but come on for that. So that, and for a DPS, is the real advantage of this. So back in sort of a few years ago when we were working on the Bath one, we had a couple of farmers who kind of missed that first deadline because they were a mixed farm, it was harvest time, and they were filling out paperwork constantly from dawn to way past dusk and couldn't meet our first deadline. But they had the opportunity within a month or so, once that was over, to then be part of the contract. And I think that for producers and farmers and stuff, that's a real bonus as to how this works.
Great. Rich, did you have something to say, or you?
Yeah, I think some of your later questions might cover it, but I think the thing I would like to really stress is that we've had decades and decades of procurement that has effectively, by definition, blocked most producers from being able to supply the public sector. So we know as a board, we've got a job to do to convince producers they can now supply the public sector. It's going to be a difficult job to persuade people. So I hope that we get across in this call, in this presentation, that yes, there are some requirements for producers. There are some prerequisites that will be needed, but a lot of the reasons that have existed in the past that have prevented a producer from supplying the public sector are removed with dynamic food procurement, and hopefully we'll go through those as we complete this presentation. So if you're sat there as a producer thinking, yeah, but this won't be for me, I won't be able to supply, I'd really challenge you to continue watching to the end, because I believe we'll be able to, for the vast majority, explain how you will be able to supply.
And just one final point for me on that, I think it is important to emphasize that what we do is open up the market. It's still a market with supply and demand and dynamics within that. Some will be commercially driven. So it doesn't mean it's a free for all. Everybody can get involved, but it still will be a market that is based on supply and demand. The thing linking back to the plan for public procurement is part of that plan was to use a scorecard that meant that public sector buyers would look at more than simply cost, and within this framework, that very much brings that to the fore, and the buyers can choose how they want to buy, and they can do that at a top strategic level, or they can do that more broken down into their own departments. But it opens up that market.
Yeah, and I think in the past, with very long supply chains on conventional supply frameworks, it's difficult to see anything other than the name of the product and the price. There wasn't a lot of other information. So procurers, it would have been almost impossible for them to make choices on food, because the supply chains are so opaque, they can't actually see the differences often between one product and another. With dynamic food procurement, the whole basis of it is regional fulfillment. So they're by definition short supply chains, and short supply chains can therefore be a lot more transparent, and that enables procurers to make choices beyond just the product name and price. They can look at lots of other factors, because part of what we do with our technology is ensure that differences and specific specifications for each product can be communicated both at the point of procurement and at the point of order when the chef is ordering the products, so that more factors can be considered than just price alone when both procuring, but also when ordering the products.
Thank you very much for that. And yeah, obviously you describe here something that happened in Bath and Somerset, and how you kind of have a fortunate kind of coming together of circumstances and events that made it possible to run a kind of a pilot approach using the dynamic purchasing system. So I was just wondering, what are the next steps kind of nationally or regionally around this, and why is there a national board for dynamic food procurement, and what are your aims?
Okay, so the National Advisory Board was set up after the proof of concept, really, from the Baines experience, instigated by Rich, and then kind of got me involved, and we rolled it out from there. And the real reason to do it was we felt it was such a good model, and it worked really, really well, and kind of identified through it. We'd done a lot of engagement with suppliers and how that worked and stuff, that really we thought it needed to go national. It was such a different way of food procurement to anything else that had been done. And the only way to do that was to get policymakers, procurers, and supplier representatives in a group, in a board, and go from there and see how we could make this work. We had DEFRA on board right from the start, Soil Association, suppliers, Bath and Somerset, the procurement guy came in as well, just to see what we could do. And then a couple of years ago, spoke to Crown Commercial Service, which is the main procurement arm of government, for central government. And much to our surprise, they agreed that this was a way forward, and they would certainly have a look at it. And they've had a dedicated person, Carol, working on it now for the best part of 2 years to drive this forward. And the advisory board is really around looking at supporting how it can be rolled out, kind of work behind it, providing information, bits of governance, to keep it on track, and getting more and more kind of people, definitely get, sort of people like DEFRA sort of behind it to give it that oomph from that bit of heft to make it work. And it's brilliant. It's gained a lot of attention across the board, really, across nationally, in terms of sort of various policy documents. And so working with that, and kind of Crown Commercial Service is the one now driving this actual model forward. And they are doing a Southwest pilot, or a pilot in the Southwest, starting, I think the tech platform goes live early next year. And so that's from Gloucestershire all the way down to Arsacilly, Cornwall, and across to Wiltshire. So it's a huge area, which will be split up into two bits. And seeing how that works, and with a package of support behind it, which is commissioning. Sort of, Greg will talk about that in a second, and how that can work. So actually, it is, once that's proved, it will then be going as a national, and will radically transform the way food procurement has done across the UK.
Yeah, so we've spoken about the success of the Baines pilot in a number of regions across the UK, and, including Wales, North Wales, but the Southwest has been nominated to run the scaled up pilot for many reasons, one of which being that Baines sits within that area as well. As Chrissy said, it covers the whole region, working with the local enterprise partnerships. We've actually set up a community interest company that will act as the hub to coordinate activities, which will include, much like this, briefing producers and buyers as to what it's all about, and then helping people to get ready. So that will be understanding more about where the public sector contracts are, what ones are going to become ready to contract with. And then at the other end, talking to producers about how they can get themselves ready. And that might be identifying and working with processes. It might be collaborating with their neighbours, and it might be about achieving accreditations that are required as an entry level for getting on board with the platform. So we're live with that now, ahead of the platform going live next year.
And then, yeah, just, sorry, Chrissy, go on.
I was going to say, it's actually going to be a really targeted support platform as well. So quite often suppliers have worked with it because they're the one that's seen as maybe part of the ones that have got sort of maybe a bit of skepticism about it and how to do it, but also it's very much getting the procurers and buyers on board as well and convincing them this is the right way forward, because believe me, they're even more skeptical than everybody else in the world. In a nice way, they you know, it is they are specialists at what they do, but they don't always look at the market, which are the specialists themselves. So it's actually working with both sides, which I think will also be key to making it work, but also something which hasn't really been done before on a widespread basis. So, well, yeah, it'll be very, very targeted.
And then all I wanted to say about the advisory board for dynamic food procurement is you can go and find out more about who we are and what we do on the website, which is dynamicfood.org. And on there, you'll see that the ambitious aim of the board is to divert 1/3 of all UK public sector food and drink spend to fresh, sustainable produce from SMEs. By 2023, which is looking increasingly aggressive objective, but it's good to have an ambition, and yeah, that I think summarizes quite clearly like really what's at the crux of what the board is about and what we're trying to achieve. So go onto that website, and on there you'll see all of the board members' names, and you'll see it's a blend of food policy makers that Chrissy mentioned, like DEFRA, or the Soil Association, or the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, people from those organisations. And then it's also procurement professionals like Chrissy, or like Richard Howroyd from Bath and North East Somerset. And then it's food producers as well. So it's those three groups that all meet quarterly, and with a shared aim of really transitioning food procurement to a much more sustainable approach that involves SMEs in a big way by the middle of the 2020s.
So what are the opportunities for smaller scale producers, would you say? I think we touched on a few of them, but also how kind of should producers be preparing for this? Kind of how might they get involved if they're not part of the pilot at the moment? I guess I'm thinking now about the North in particular.
Well, the first thing I would recommend doing is going onto the dynamicfood.org website and reading it. It's very short. It won't take more than 15 minutes. And on there, there's an email address that you can register your interest with Crown Commercial Service, and they will then keep you informed of developments as the dynamic food procurement framework is expanded across the UK. And then if you're in the Southwest region, then obviously you can contact the Southwest Food Hub, which if you Google Southwest Food Hub, you'll find their website, and that lays out all the information there as well of what's happening and how you can get involved. And then the third thing is start to think about, in your whatever category of food you are producing, what is the right level of certification that you can get to substantiate what makes your food different. You will need certification of some sort to supply the public sector. And again, you can find out more about that by contacting the board, the Dynamic Food Board, because the DEFRA will be sharing more and more information about the level of certification that's needed. I'd say those are my top 3 tips.
I think as well, it's there's a bit about considering where you would like to be. If there's a new opportunity for you, how can you scale up production, and what are the implications and costs that might go along with that, and what return on that investment will you need to make that viable and sustainable? I think one of the two things in the background that play to this being a really important time for the food sector, as well as what's happened with COVID, is Brexit. And is also food security, which has been highlighted through the COVID crisis, and also through Brexit will be further highlighted. And there will be demand for shorter supply chains, for more produce from the UK. There is this sort of perfect storm, if you like, coming together, or of opportunity. So, but people do need to sort of look at where they are and where they might want to be if there's new opportunity there, because it won't be everything's available day one. It will be a need for sort of gradual growth, and you'll need to know how you fit into that. And then also, I think having a thought about processing, ultimately, particularly from a farming perspective, your produce generally has to have a number of things done to it before it ends up on a plate. So it's probably being aware of what else within your region is needed to facilitate the sort of getting of your product to the plate, and do you need to and make contact with those people so you've got a better understanding, so you're more ready when hopefully the Dynamic Food Procurement platform reaches your region.
And also I'd say keep an eye on what's happening in the Southwest, because we're hoping, we're expecting this pilot to go very well, and of course that will then be rolled out across nationally. And it might be that the north will be the next region, probably the northwest will be the next region that it goes to. There's been some work done from Greg and a couple of others before. So keep an eye on what's happening down, sort of down in the Southwest, because we will be looking at doing a similar thing around the country, and also we'll be learning from that. And also, if we're looking to engage with people, please engage. I think quite often it's like, oh, that's quite difficult, that's too hard, or we haven't got time to do it. But we can't, as a board, and also as part of Greg Southwest Food Hub, we can't really understand all the issues unless people talk to us as well. We can assume, and we can know some of it, but we don't know all of it because we're working from different angles. So if we're asking for information, don't go, oh God, they don't know what they're doing, and I'm not going to engage with them. Actually, give us the information that we can then kind of work with, and it's that kind of engagement from all sides will work. And yeah, lessons learned down the Southwest will be learnt and acted on, and moved on, improved where necessary. So yeah, get involved.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, one of the areas on the website that Rich alluded to, southwestfoodhub.co.uk, we will be logging the questions and answers, and we encourage questions because this is extremely implicated. It's extremely challenging. It's very new, and there's a lot to learn. And as Rich said earlier, there's a lot of history with this, and it's not much of it's not positive news for SMEs. So we're looking to change all of that. So we need the questions.
I guess you've kind of also touched on quite a lot of this already in this question, but like what are the challenges for producers, and like how do you think the national board approach can kind of help overcome these? Kind of what would you say to persuade people that this is different this time?
Well, technology has been a massive. I mean, Rich is far more qualified to talk about it than me, but it's changed so much in our lives, hasn't it? We've learned even more so over the last 9 months, but even over the last 5-10 years, technology has advanced to such a stage that the capability can make anything happen. How we book hotels and holidays now is a lot different to going and looking at CFAX all those years ago, which we used to do. And now you book your hotel, you specify what flavor biscuit you want with your cup of tea, almost, don't you? And so that's facilitates. It's perfect for precisely what we're talking about here.
Thanks for that CFAX analogy, Greg. Yeah, I think Chrissy touched on some of the important, like most sort of fundamental differences from what's happened before. So what's happened before is a procurer opens a framework, and producers aren't aware it's opened, and those frameworks only open every 3 to 5 years. So if you miss it, you're screwed for another 5 years. Second thing is, normally procurers would have been looking for a supplier to supply everything in a category, all fruit and veg or all meats. That no longer is an issue. You can just supply what you do. The third thing is, in the past, if you'd applied to and you'd procured, you tendered your services, and then for whatever reason you were rejected, that was it. You're out. Whereas with dynamic food procurement, you can find out why was it I've been rejected, and then address that issue and reapply time and time and time again throughout the duration of the contract. So you don't have to just do it at the beginning. So Chrissy's already summarized those points. They are major barriers that have stopped people before being able to supply. And then once you get into the workings of actually managing a dynamic food procurement like this, which is what we've been doing now for years, you learn about all the smaller things, the little issues and problems that get in the way of SMEs being able to supply. And so the technology element that Greg's referring to is about firstly ensuring that chefs can order their food in the way they expect. So they want to pick a date and time when the food is going to be delivered. But secondly, and treating them as a customer, but secondly, understanding from each individual producer how they can fulfill their food. And so essentially treating them as a customer as well. And that simply hasn't happened in the past. Producers have just been expected to deliver according to the requirement of the logistics coordinator. And it's that kind of balance that the technology manages. So it's making sure the customer gets what they want, but also ensuring that the producer can fulfill according to their capabilities. And what we've identified are a number of different parameters that define how an individual producer can supply their food, and the different things that the things that differ producer to producer. You know, some producers can only fulfill on certain days. Some producers need a longer lead time than others for the order to be fulfilled. There are lots of parameters like that. And in fact, if you combine them all up, there are hundreds of thousands of different combinations that the technology platform has to manage to ensure inclusivity for SMEs, so that every individual SME that qualifies can still fulfill. And they may have greater or lesser limitations in terms of when they can fulfill and how they can fulfill, but they can still fulfill, and customers can still buy their products. So that is what is fundamentally different as a result of the technology. It's this ability to actually make things work so that producers can fulfill according to their capabilities.
And also following on from that, it's also the ability for procurers to learn at the same time. That might sound a strange thing, but as we've said kind of several times now, that traditionally once a contract's let, that's it. But actually for using this model, procurers can actually kind of pick that stuff up as they go along, which they might have thought about. So the example was like by kind of mixed farm one and paperwork around harvest time. Back in Baines, we were looking at perhaps doing a bakery contract, and discovered quite early on not to speak to a mid-sized bakery in December when they're making mince pies. They came back to us in January. But it's little things like that which sound really almost trite to a certain point, but it could have been really frustrating for them had they been locked out to begin with. But actually it means procurement people actually think, okay, we're not just sitting in an office going, we're just filling paperwork. These are real people, real lives, and real businesses we're looking at. And what's the impact on them on what we're doing? And that doesn't always happen with the procurement people.
And it's a shame, and the same for chefs, Chrissy.
Yeah.
You know, we've had to educate chefs around, you know, if someone is rearing chickens and slaughtering chickens, and they're a small team, you know, when they're slaughtering chickens, they can't at the same time be butchering chickens and packing them and sending them off. And so chefs have to understand and be educated that, okay, on a Monday and on a Thursday, I can't expect a farm to be fulfilling chicken. I can only get it on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. And it's those pieces that that just haven't worked before. It's the whole thing's just fallen down. And so, yeah, and then people have usually, when I say that, have a question. Well, what happens if I do need chicken on the day that they're not doing chicken? Well, that's where the dynamic procurement piece comes in. There are other suppliers, and so, you know, if you absolutely need chicken on a day that your chosen farm can't do it, there's another farm or there's another supplier of chicken that does. And so that, and also that goes back to what Greg was saying about a marketplace. It is there are lots of different factors within the marketplace that determines which product a chef is going to order, but it's not an exclusive contract. So you're not, if you're successful at getting your chicken listed, it doesn't mean all the chicken the customer is going to buy is yours. there'll be a choice for some of the reasons we've explained, around fulfillment, around price for sure, and around certifications and other elements of what makes your chicken different from another chicken.
And it's interesting. So, through the work we've done already with the Southwest Food Hub, you engage, so higher and further education are two target categories for us to kick the platform off with. So you're talking to educators, and actually within some of those colleges and universities in particular, we're already putting in provision for working with the people that are learning about culinary skills, the future chefs and the caterers, to say, actually, what we need to introduce is how do you buy more sustainably, more through shorter supply chains? Because what we're just highlighting is that's not something that generally is taught. They're taught how to turn it into beautiful dishes and really good tasting food. But the bit about the supply chain is often just dismissed, and therefore when they go into industry, they buy either what's presented to them by somebody who does the purchasing, or what's presented to them by an international food service supplier, rather than perhaps what might be available around them, which might be more sustainable. So education is a big part of what we're delivering as well, and these links all help to hopefully create not just a system but a movement.
Yep, I like that one. Yeah, creating a movement as well. Yeah.
That leads on very perfectly to my last question, actually, which is kind of how do we work together, make sure that this approach kind of supports more regenerative, more sustainable and fair farming system rather than just kind of any old farming system, but local. So thank you.
I'll start just through experience of what we did in Somerset for Hinckley, where they'll spend £10 million a year on local food and drink at peak, is I think try and, if you can, take away some of the barriers that have been there before and recognise that this is an opportunity that by working collaboratively, working together, we've got a chance of succeeding with, rather than perhaps assuming that it's not going to work and approaching it with a very negative perspective. Because in the food sector that I've worked in all of my life, it is challenging, and generally there are hurdles there, but I think the people that you'll come into contact with will be wanting this to succeed. So work with them and try not to be too cynical would be my first starter for 10.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the biggest challenges to dynamic food procurement's aims, which is a third of all produce to be fulfilled within along short supply chains regionally, I think one of the biggest challenges will be lack of producer engagement. They just won't believe that this is going to work for them. And I think that's going to be one of our hardest challenges. So please do take the time to look at what we're doing and seriously consider it. I really think without that, if producers just don't jump the first hurdle, then the whole thing's not going to work. But then assuming that you do, and the producers do actually engage and then see through any skepticism that is understandably built up over decades of not being able to supply the public sector, then I think the opportunity to support regenerative farming and fair farming systems is fantastic, because as I mentioned earlier, one of the fundamental changes of moving from long supply chains that are opaque in their nature, you cannot see how the food was produced, who produced the food, or where it was produced. With short supply chains, you can see all of that. It's fully transparent. So it means that when people are doing things well, when producers are doing things right, and they're able to substantiate that, then those differences can actually be recognized by procurers and by chefs. And I can tell you there will be demand for that. So that's I think we've lost Rachel, but
I think now's the time, because we've had a lot of sort of push on sort of looking at resilient food systems. We've got Brexit coming up, or the kind of negotiations coming up. which will change the procurement rules because they're all at the moment under EU jurisdiction. But also COVID-19, the one silver lining perhaps of that is made people think about where their food is coming from. And long may that last. It might be a temporary measure, but hopefully that'll continue. So I think the emphasis, not the emphasis, but the kind of, this is a window of opportunity to really push this forward and make it work while these things are very, very prevalent to people. And sustainable food procurement has been a long time coming to a certain extent. I've been working in this field for years, even before Baines, and it's just been quite resistant to it. But I think now is the time to move it. There's a lot of people talking, a lot of move from central government to push this type of thing forward as well as kind of individual actions. I think in terms of farming, procurement, supply, and all the rest of it, I think this is a key time to look at and bring these all together into one way of procuring for the public good across the board, and that is also good farming practices as well.
Well, brilliant. That just leaves me to say thank you so much to Chrissy, Greg and Rich from the Dynamic Food Procurement National Advisory Board. As I mentioned, they're really keen to get as many producers involved in this opportunity, and for producers to be involved in helping to sort of shape how it's going to work in their own region. So if you'd like to find out more, please visit their website, which you'll see here on the screen, and that is www.dynamicfood.org. Yeah, so thanks very much again for listening, and goodbye.